Welcome to another installment of Donning the Armor. This morning we will begin in 2 Samuel chapter 21, verse 1. Now there was a famine in the days of David for 3 years, year after year, and David inquired of the Lord. And the Lord answered, "It is because of Saul and his bloodthirsty house, because he killed the Gibeonites." Now, the timing of this is uncertain. It could be like the book of Judges, where the end of Judges ends up taking things that happen earlier in time and just placing the stories at the end instead of interrupting the flow of the actual sequence of Judges, because the events didn't have a judge attached to them. Or this event could actually be after the rebellion of Absalom, after the rebellion of Sheba, and this is coming later in the days of David. There's some wording that could put it in both ways when it comes to Mephibosheth. It could be that this is when he found out that Mephibosheth even existed, or just that it's referring to Mephibosheth as well. But regardless of where this is, because some people think it's out of place, some people do believe this just follows in the years following Sheba's rebellion. There now comes a time during the reign of David that for 3 years, year after year, that David has his land in a famine. He's inquiring of the Lord, like, Lord, why is this famine coming? And the Lord, probably through a prophet, he had Gad, he had Nathan. It tells him it's because of Saul and his bloodthirsty house, because he killed the Gibeonites. Now, it's not as though he had genocided the entire Gibeonites, but he killed Gibeonites, and they were not to be touched. Now, a lot of the reason why people think this might be not towards the end of David's years and be back towards the beginning is because why does God wait 20 years, 30 years to punish Israel with a famine for something Saul did? It could just be that with everything that David has experienced, this is just the next trial that God has brought forth. God's timing is not ours. We don't really have to understand why he's putting something in our lives at that moment. And it doesn't have to be in the order that we think it would be. But that's why people don't really understand exactly where this should be. But let's just take it for what it is instead of trying to place it in a certain point. Because it's the underlying point of the verses and the account that actually matter, not the timing of it. The Lord has inspired it to be in Scripture because it's something to be remembered and something that we can take something from. Not so much that it needs to be told in a sequential fashion. So the king called the Gibeonites and spoke to them. Now the Gibeonites were not of the children of Israel, but of the remnant of the Amorites, the children of Israel who had sworn to protect them. But Saul had sought to kill them in his zeal for the children of Israel and Judah. Now, remember who the Gibeonites were. This was the tribe who, when Joshua had first come into the land, were fearful that Joshua and the Israelites would destroy them as well. So they sent representatives out. They put on old torn clothing. They put dirt all over themselves. They used old and beaten wineskins and moldy bread, and then went out and acted as if they had come on this long journey to make a peace treaty with the Israelites, even though they were like 2 days that away. And they did all this to trick Joshua and the Israelites. Joshua and the Israelites did as Israel tends to do and forgets to inquire of God. And instead of seeking the advice of God, makes an oath to protect them from their enemies. And God holds them to that oath. It was a rash oath. It was an oath that they were told specifically not to make with the children of Canaan. But God still held them to it anyway. And because he held them to it, he expected it to be honored and continue to be honored because Israel was always supposed to explain their history and the reasons for it to their children. They were supposed to pass down not just the law, but their history. So here comes Saul, the mad king himself, and he's going to try to destroy Gibeonites. Why? No idea. There's no inkling of history written about this. We have no idea why Saul sought to kill them. It just says for his zeal for the children of Israel and Judah. But we don't actually have an account of this happening in Scripture. Now, there is books referred to. You know, the book of Jasher, the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel. There are various books that are referred to in inspired Scripture that God didn't see fit to keep, to protect for us to have 2,000 years later. It wasn't important. They didn't hold the theological lessons and the lessons that we need to take and learn to understand and be his followers. And often I think personally, they didn't speak of the ultimate reason why Scripture exists at all. And that is the coming of the Messiah. I think one of the things that sets apart divinely inspired Scripture, apart from other writings of the time, and the reason why they were protected versus others, and why some were truly taught and read and treated as Scripture, which the Deuterocanonical books, the Apocrypha, wasn't in the time of the Jews. They didn't treat it as Scripture because it didn't speak of the coming Messiah. You know, one of the most famous rabbis of the Middle Ages, the Rambam, he, even not accepting Jesus, still said to be a Jew, to have salvation, basically, to have some kind of reconciliation with God, you needed to look every day for the coming Messiah. Now, they clearly missed him because he had already come, and they refused to accept it. But even he said that everything that's divinely inspired looks forward to the coming Messiah. So the things that aren't canonical, that aren't part of what is the read, that it's because they didn't look forward to the coming Messiah. All of these, the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah, we have 1st and 2nd Chronicles. We have 1st and 2nd Kings teaching all, because all of it is pushing through the lineage that will bring forth the Messiah. We don't have a history of Ishmael. We have a history of Isaac. Because that's the one from whom the Messiah was going to come. Everything that is inspired Scripture, to my understanding and my opinion, is because it all relates to the coming of Messiah. And then the arrival of Messiah, how to live for Messiah, and the return of Messiah. That is what our Scripture holds. That is what the divinely inspired Scripture speaks to, Jesus Christ. And if it didn't, God didn't see didn't see it worthy to keep around for us. So we don't exactly know why Saul attacked the Gibeonites, why he killed as many of them as he did, however many of them he killed. Because there clearly still are Gibeonites. Because David speaks to them and looks to recompense them for their loss. Therefore David said to the Gibeonites, "What shall I do for you? And with what shall I make atonement, that you may bless the inheritance of the Lord?" Like, I know Saul had done wrong, the previous king, but what can I do? This was before my time. What can I do to make this right? The Lord has told me there is a famine in the land for the last 3 years because of something Saul did to you. What can I do to atone for the sins of my predecessor? Because when we stand in a position of leadership, we can't always look and say, it doesn't matter what my predecessor did. And it's funny because I literally just had this conversation with my wife like 2 days ago, but about work and about one of her coworkers who was getting a lot of flack being in a position for something to happen the year before she was in that position. But I guess this is a sign that it is true that in a way we are not, when we stand in a position of authority, we are not, we still are responsible for atoning for what somebody did before, for at least attempting to make it right. If there is a pastor who falls and needs to be removed from ministry, the new pastor takes his place, does need to find a way to atone for the sins of the pastor that took over before him. He needs to find a way to make it right with the hurt members of the flock that are there. He didn't do it, but there's going to be people who are hurt, and he's going to have to find a way to make atonement with them. Now, they may try to ask way too much of him, something he can't possibly do. And that, in a way, lets him off the hook because they're the ones being unreasonable with the asking of atonement, with what they're asking for. But he still has a responsibility to make the attempt. That way, the Lord will bless what is there. You can't just come in and say, well, that's not my problem. Because you're there to lead. You're there with a specific duty put in front of you as the shepherd of those people. Even when it comes to employment, if an old boss does something that's terrible and they get fired and they get sent out and you take over their place, it is incumbent upon you to make good what went wrong, or at least attempt in good faith to make good what went wrong. You might not be able to meet what they want because what they want might be completely unreasonable, but you still have to make the attempt. And that's what they're saying. Gibeonites, what shall I do? What can I do to make atonement? And the Gibeonites said to him, we will have no silver or gold from Saul or from his house, nor shall you kill any man in Israel for us. So he said, whatever you say, I will do for you. Saying, we don't want money. We don't want material from his house or from him. And you don't have to go slaughtering any innocents of Israel for us. He didn't slaughter 30,000, so you have to kill 30,000 Israelites. And I'm sure there are many pagan nations around who would have asked that, because that's what they would have done. But they're saying, no. We're not asking for that. So what do you wish? And they do have a very harsh ask. They do have a very brutal ask. Then they answered the king, as for the man who consumed us and plotted against us, that we should be destroyed from remaining in any of the territories of Israel, let 7 men of his descendants be delivered to us, and we will hang them before the Lord in Gibeah of Saul, whom the Lord chose. That's a tough ask. They want 7 of his descendants to be delivered, and they will hang them before the Lord, in the presence of the Lord, in Gibeah of Saul, where Saul is from, because the Lord chose Saul. Almost as if they are shaking their fist at the God who chose Saul. Now the Lord has told David to go do this. So the Lord isn't condemning what they're going to ask for. This is what they want to make things right. They want to hang out these 7 descendants. 7, meaningfully in Bible being the number of completion. So we don't want a ton of innocent people in Israel being killed because of what he did. but we want 7 of his descendants. We want a completion of his descendants to act as a completion of this issue. And we're going to hang them out before the Lord in the city of the man whom the Lord chose. And the king said, I will give them. So David agrees. This is what you wish. I'll give them over to you. And as somebody reading it, it comes off really harsh. Because it does seem as though they are flaunting this in front of the Lord. That the Lord did this, so he chose Saul, and Saul did this, so we're going to do this as a way of thumbing our nose at the Lord and shaking our fist at the Lord. But the Lord clearly doesn't say it that way. And King David clearly doesn't see it that way. But the king spared Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, whom because of the Lord's oath that was between them, between David and Jonathan, the son of Saul. So he spares Mephibosheth. Now, because of this, he needs to go out and find out who the descendants of Saul are. So the reason why people will sometimes take this to be in a different period of time than the end of David's life is because David said, is there any, in chapter 9, he said, is there any descendants of Saul that I may bless? And they come up with Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan. Now we're finding out about all these other children of Saul. So some people believe that the reason why he found Mephibosheth at all is because of this issue caused him to find Mephibosheth. However, if you put this at the end of his life, then you look at and say, well, because David had asked if there are any descendants of Saul, this is how he knows where any of these people are. And he saved Mephibosheth, and now he still knows where all these other people are so that he can give them over. It's a kind of where does it fit? And we have precedent, as in Judges, of accounts being put at the end of a book that belong towards the beginning or somewhere interspersed in between. So, I don't know where. I am just as okay putting it at the end as putting it somewhere towards the beginning. I don't think it matters as much as the point being told. But the king spared Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, because of the Lord's oath between them, between David and Jonathan, the son of Saul. So the king took Armani and Mephibosheth, the 2 sons of Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah. Now that Mephibosheth is not Jonathan's son Mephibosheth, that's Saul's son Mephibosheth, who more than likely Jonathan's son is named after. He probably named his son after his brother, Mephibosheth. So that's actually Mephibosheth's uncle, Mephibosheth, whom she bore to Saul, and the 5 sons of Michal, the daughter of Saul, whom she brought up for Adriel, the son of Barzillai, the Amalethite. Now, we saw Barzillai, but this is not the same Barzillai. And Michal, 5 sons of Michal, the daughter of Saul, if we remember, when he brought the ark in, he cast her out. It said that she would have no children. Now, we don't know if it's any children from that point on or any children, period. But it does say that she brought these children up for Adriel, meaning they aren't her children. These 5 sons are children that she reared and brought up and raised, but not actually gave birth to. And he delivered them into the hands of the Gibeonites, and they hanged them on the hill before the Lord. So they fell, all 7 together, and were put to death in the days of harvest, in the first days in the beginning of the barley harvest. So he acquiesces to their demand. He gives over 7 of Saul's descendants. And they are hanged. They are put to death. But he saves Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan. He continues to look out for him, whether you put it at the beginning or the end, or around chapter 9, or at the end after the rebellion of Sheba. Either way, he still looks out for Mephibosheth. He keeps his oath to Mephibosheth and hands over these others. Now Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, took sackcloth and spread it for herself on the rock, from the beginning of the harvest until the late rains poured on them from heaven. And she did not allow the birds of the air to rest on them by day, nor the beasts of the field by night. So this mother is protecting the bodies of these children. They're dead, but she's protecting them from being ripped apart by scavenger birds and being defiled. She's spreading the sackcloth out to keep them protected as best as possible in her grief. And David was told what Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, the concubine of Saul, had done. Then David went and took the bones of Saul and the bones of Jonathan his son from the men of Jabesh Gilead, who had stolen them from the streets of Bethshan, where the Philistines had hung them up, after the Philistines had struck down Saul and Gilboa. So he brought up the bones of Saul and the bones of Jonathan his son from there, and they gathered the bones of those who had been hanged. They buried the bones of Saul and Jonathan his son in the country of Benjamin and Zelah, in the tomb of Kish his father. So they performed all that the king commanded. And after that, God heeded the prayer for the land. So he was moved by what Saul's concubine had done. Now he takes the bones and the bodies of the men, and even goes forth and has the bones of Saul and Jonathan brought forth. The people of Jabesh Gilead had buried them. They had given them a proper burial after they stole them from the Philistines because of the kindness that was shown to them by Saul. But now he brings them to the resting place they always should have been, in the tomb of Kish his father, in his own land. And God heeded the prayer for the land. And sometimes when we're in a trial, the trial isn't always about what we think it is. So Saul did go forth and kill the Gibeonites. And that oath meant something. Oaths always mean something to God. Now you have these descendants of Saul being killed and falling victim to the sin of Saul. The same way David's concubines fell victim to the sin of Absalom and David and Ahithophel. You have these 7 young men being murdered, their mother having to mourn and protect them. But now you have all their bones being united, where they always should have been. It could almost be argued that the bones of Saul and Jonathan should have been returned to the tomb of his father in the beginning. And maybe that's part of this whole process, that God was returning the bones of his first anointed king back to the tomb that they should have always dwelt in. But the importance of this is the oath. You know, I spoke a little bit previously about replacement theology being an artifact of a church tradition that didn't have a physical Israel. So they had to find a way to explain the prophecies of God that spoke of a physical Israel existing without there being one there. But this goes to show these men were not the children of God. They were not Israelites. They even seemingly were thumbing their nose at him. At least that's the way I read it. I could be wrong. But his people made an oath, and God wanted that oath honored, period. And because Saul didn't honor it, it was incumbent upon David to honor it. God wouldn't allow that oath to be broken even by his own anointed king. It didn't get replaced when a new king took the throne. No matter what judge was there, that oath was still in place. No matter what king took the throne, that oath was still in place. Now the Lord has made oaths to his own chosen people, the people of Israel, the Jewish people. Those oaths aren't simply thrown in the trash because the king has taken his throne. Jesus is the fulfillment of many of those oaths. He is the fulfillment of prophecy. He is the reconciliation that God has promised since Abraham. But at no point did he say, I will simply be finished with my chosen people. But instead is said that the fullness of the Gentiles will bring forth a jealousy upon his chosen people, which will lead them back to him. Lead them back to the one they should have recognized immediately as their king. He has not forsaken his chosen people. He keeps his oath, and he means for them to be kept. His promises are not taken lightly. God keeps his promises, which is why he expects us to keep them. Which is why Jesus tells us not even to take oaths. Because God takes them so seriously that if we take any oath, we are to be held to it, period. Just let your yes be yes and your no be no. That way you're not making promises you do not intend to keep. God has not broken his promise. God is not forsaking his people simply because for 1900 years there was no physical land to fulfill that prophecy. Because now we can see how he's kept his word and he's kept his oath, and Israel is yet again a nation. It is once again there. When a land was promised back to the Jews and Britain balked, the Lord forced their hand. And more catastrophe came onto the world. A lot of people don't realize that Britain had agreed to give Israel the land in the early 1900s because it was British mandate Palestine. Palestine was named that by the Romans after the Philistines. British had promised to give the Jews back their nation. Then after World War I, decided, you know what? Sorry, we're not going to give it. So what came forth after what was the most horrific war, one of the most horrific wars in the history of mankind, World War I? We had World War II. And only after that, and after the tragedies and destruction, loss in life, and the judgment of the Lord that came upon the entirety of the world, then they got returned their land. The people and the rulers of the world held a carrot out to the Israelites, out to the Jews, and tried to pull it back. And God said, no, My people will be honored. Those who bless Israel are blessed. Those who curse Israel are cursed. And the world was cursed with World War II. And now we stand on the precipice of yet more destruction. Because people want again curse Israel. A nation that is far from perfect, because all nations are far from perfect. We're reading scripture here. Kings, Chronicles, the prophets, 1st and 2nd Samuel, Judges. You could read over and over again about how imperfect Israel has always been. But God still said those who bless Israel are blessed and those who curse it are cursed. There's no in between. God keeps his promises. God keeps his oath, and he has made an oath to his people. And eventually they will come back to him. All nations will kneel. All tongues will praise the name of Christ. And when the fulfillment of the Gentiles has come in, and that jealousy is put on the hearts of the Jews, and they seek him again as they should have, then after that, he will once again heed the prayer of the land. He will heed the prayers of the people, because he wishes for his chosen people to be reconciled to him, just as he prays for everybody else to be reconciled for him. Just as he wishes for all to be reconciled to him, for none to perish. That is the wondrous, glorious love of our God. His all-consuming, his steadfast, his long-suffering love. Now when the Philistines were at war again with Israel, David and his servants with him went down and fought against the Philistines. And David grew faint. Then Ishbi-Benob, who was one of the sons of the giant, the weight of whose bronze spear was 300 shekels, who was bearing a new sword, thought he could kill David. But Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, came to his aid, and struck the Philistine and killed him. Then the men of David swore to him, saying, You shall go out no more with us to battle, lest you quench the lamp of Israel. David picked up 5 stones at the riverbed, used one against Goliath because there were 4 more giants. The sons of the giant. Now, the sons of the giant people sometimes believe it means the sons of Goliath, but it seems to be the giant actually refers to Goliath's father, and that these are the sons of the giant, meaning Goliath's brothers. Either way, there's 4 more of them. And David, still going out to battle at the end of his life, is almost killed by one. And that leaves now his mighty men to have to do battle with these giants. Because if David falls, the light of Israel falls. He is the man who seeks it, the man who is after God, a man after God's own heart. I figured I'd get that out eventually. If he dies, there's going to be a dark time in Israel. They've survived dark times already. But with David's death in battle, a darker time would come. Because they would once again fear the giants. Fear the giants of the Philistines coming to battle them. They would fear outside enemies coming in. And that would lead Israel to a time of darkness yet again, just as the Judges was. Now it happened afterward that there was again a battle with the Philistines at Gob. Then Sibbecai, the Hushonite, killed Saph, who was one of the sons of the giant. Again there was war at Gob with the Philistines, where Elihan, the son of Jeri-Oragim, the Bethlehemite, killed the brother of Goliath the Gittite, the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. Yet again there was war at Gath, where there was a man of great stature who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in number. And he also was born to the giant. So the 6 fingers and 6 toes, that has nothing to do with him being a giant. That's just a birth defect, just worth mentioning. So when he defied Israel, Jonathan, the son of Shimeah, David's brother, killed him. These 4 were born to the giant in Gath and fell by the hand of David and by the hand of his servants. A sign that Israel no longer needed David to slay the giant. You know, when they first encountered Goliath, no one would face him. Even Saul, who was a head and shoulders above all the other Israelites, trembled in fear. No one would fight the giant. They had no inspiration. They had no trust in God to see them through that far. Now they have the lamp of Israel. They have David burning bright. They have his legacy. They have his shadow of courage and honor falling upon the nation. And now they show that they no longer need him to slay the giants that are before them. They can be a great nation without David having to lead them in that battle. That the nation is mightier now than it has ever been. Because now they have his shadow shining over them. His honor shining over them. His courage and his warrior instinct coming out, showing forth that they can have victory where once they stood in fear. Israel did not want to go into the promised land because they were afraid of the giants they saw there. They ignored Caleb, they ignored Joshua, and they had to wander for 40 years before the next generation was ready. You have Saul, the anointed king of Israel, even he being afraid to face the giant that stood in Israel's way. The giant that stood in their path, that kept them from being as prosperous as they could possibly be. They allowed that giant to keep them in a spot where they couldn't move further in life. But now, with the legacy of David hanging over them, they now know they can go forth. They can be as great as they choose to be, as long as they follow the Lord in the same way David had. David's legacy was of a king who followed God in all things. Not a man who was sinless. Not a man who would never make a misstep. Not a man who didn't sometimes stumble into following his passions. But a man who never made excuses and always sought the Lord. Who always repented. Who always looked to God first. When there's a giant standing in his path, he didn't look to armor and look to swords and look to see if there's a chariot. He didn't look to might. He didn't look to man. He looked to God. His legacy is bringing forth all things and showing his people the way they need to go. And because of that, they now understand that, David, you can stay behind because you are the light. Your legacy is our light, and with it, we can conquer anything in our path. And that is the picture of Christ upon us. That with him, we can conquer all. Because it's with him that we truly have power. And our legacy for all those around us, that light that we're to shine on the world, should not be one of a soldier with a conquering soldier with a sword, but one who is always looking to God, not as one who is having the best advice, looking for the next great Ahithophel to tell us how we should go and how we should move on and what path we should take, but one that knows that we look to God, we look to Christ, we lean into Him. Let that be our legacy, so that those who follow us know that there is no giant that can stand in their path, because our King has shown us where we are to walk, and there is none mightier. There is none mightier standing behind us than Jesus Christ. There is none mightier who could stand before us than Jesus Christ. That the path before us might have giants, but they don't have power, because the one who truly has power is the one with which we walk alongside. They understood that David's legacy was one that allowed them to do great and mighty things. We need to have that same legacy for those who follow us. And we have that legacy because of the one we follow and whose footsteps we follow in. Anyway, that's where we shall end it for today. I hope this was fruitful for you. I hope to see you back again next time. But until then, be blessed.